Awesome. There we go. So we're going to start out with an icebreaker that can be used to foster deeper relationships with people. One of the other pet peeves, in addition to small talk, that I have with the workspace is how inauthentic they are sometimes, how we kind of put on these personalities and these hats when we go into the workspace. And some of that I think is good, and that's a conversation for another time, but it really sucks our personalities away from us. So the icebreaker that I've designed for today is a simple question answer icebreaker, but the goal of it is really to start getting deeper with people, to start connecting with people beyond just what you did this weekend, or yeah, the weather kind of sucks today, doesn't it? So the first question that we're going to be answering is, where did you grow up? Easy. Then the second question is, how many siblings do you have, and where are you in that order? Because we know, depending on where that person is in order, it also shapes a lot of their lives. And the third question to this icebreaker is, just name one experience that shaped your life and who you are today. So for the sake of it, I will model and start. And if we have any participants who would like to come off mute and share, feel free to. So I'm Avraham Calhoun. I was born in Richmond, Virginia. Okay, really, I was born in Mechanicsville, not Richmond, but I like to say Richmond, Virginia. And I am the second of two siblings, so I am the younger child. And an experience that shaped me personally, I think, was having the opportunity to teach fifth grade in Brooklyn, New York, in a neighborhood. And most of my students were first-generation Americans. Most of their parents were either from Haiti or the Dominican Republic. And I had a lot of experience with working with cultures around in Europe and the Middle East, but I never had a chance to work with many Latin American cultures growing up. And so that was really exciting for me to have that opportunity to work with individuals from the Caribbean and get to know a little bit more about their culture. So that is my icebreaker. Now, oh, great, cool. And we have someone sharing in the chat. They grew up in Northern Michigan. They're the youngest of 14. And hiring a coach when I was 16 changed the trajectory of their life forever. Well, thank you for sharing that in the chat. I really appreciate it. And also thank you for shouting out coaching, because coaching is super important in the world. I also have been working with a personal coach for years. And that's kind of what led me to start this business. So again, what that icebreaker does is it gives you an opportunity to get beyond the small talk barriers, get beyond the what's normally shared at work conversations with anybody and everybody. Awesome. So we are going to move on. Now, before we actually jump in to our meat of the class this evening, I wanted to kind of just pose a question to the group, which is, when you think about the different generations that you're familiar with, what do you feel are values that they hold as it relates to the professional world or the workspace? So for example, I'm a millennial. What values do millennials hold as it relates to the workspace, right? So just thinking off the top of your head, think about those generations and go for it. Gen X, hold loyalty. Love that. Thank you. So it's important for us to have a broader awareness of the people that we are working with. And one of the ways that we can think about individuals is in groups, like generations. And so I'm going to head to the next slide. What you see here, I can't see it. I have a bunch of windows. One moment. Are different generations lined up. Now, I understand there is quite a bit on the slide. So if you want to take a picture of this, feel free to and save it. But to go quickly through the generations as a snapshot, first, we have 5 generations that are potentially working in our workspaces right now, starting with the traditionalists who were born between 1928 and 1945. They're certainly being somewhat phased out of the workspace currently. Then we have our baby boomers, 1946 to 1940, 1946 to 1964. We have our Gen Xers, 65 to 1980. We have our millennials, 1981 to 1996. And we have our Generation Z or Gen Zs, 97 to 2010. Now, the first thing that we want to look at when we're exploring any generation is what was the context in which this generation was coming of age in? So for our traditionalists, they were really coming of age during and right after the Great Depression and before and during the onset of the Second World War. And so what you start to see here is a lot of global chaos occurring in the world at the time the traditionalists are growing up and coming up, specifically with the Great Depression. And that in turn created a lot of values for this generation around human connection and loyalty. The safety was in the community during this time period. And so our traditionalists really value community-based learning and community spaces. They also really value the human connection, in-person work. And that comes from them being really rooted in their own communities and not necessarily living in the same globalized world that the younger generations did. In addition, they appreciate respect and they respect and enjoy authority and hierarchy. So not only do they enjoy being in places of authority and hierarchy, but they're also more likely to respect authority and hierarchy in the workspace than some of the other generations. And that is likely due to the type of leadership that they needed during their contextual coming of age time. So leading themselves through the Great Depression into World War II, needing that really strong leadership. And so the kind of motto for the traditionalist is waste not, but want not. So this idea of really conserving what we have, conserving our energy, conserving our resources, and also not necessarily wanting more or, really wanting to expand and get bigger because you really just had to kind of focus on what you had. So that's a snapshot of our traditionalist. Now we're going to move into the baby boomer generation, which is from 1946 to 1964. So some of the major events that are taking place in the world at this time is obviously post-World War II, where we start to see the dawn of American expansionism, and the United States moves out of this period of isolationism to really actually going beyond their borders and getting involved in foreign affairs. And coming out of post-World War II, going through seeing the beginnings of the Cold War, all of these things made a society that was really focused on expanding, but those societal networks that we know today had still not fully built up yet, because this was right when the world was starting to get extremely globalized. And so because of that, baby boomers had a strong work ethic to start building up the world back post-World War II. However, because there was still limited jobs, limited career paths, because the world had not come fully globalized yet, there was a lot of competition to actually seek out and get these jobs. So you were the best and you were competitive to get what you wanted. They value efficacy and efficiency. Does it work? And is it efficient in what it does? Does it actually do it the best way possible? Baby boomers are extremely independent and self-assertive. And many of us have probably experienced that in the workspace. They can be very, very inspiring. But at times that inspiration can get a little intense if you're not necessarily used with that same level of strong work ethic and commitment. And finally, work became part of their identity. What you did as your job was who you were as an individual. Now we're moving into Generation X, which was born 1965 to 1980. These individuals started to come of age during new tech advancements. So we're starting to see the world switch from being an analog-based world, and more digital technology is coming about in these spaces. In addition, we've got the Cold War happening during this time period. So there was a lot of not necessarily global instability, but at any moment, something could fracture. And because of, and on top of that, their families, their parents were at work. They were hard workers. They were the boomers. They were the traditionalists. They had to go and build these societies. And so they're often known as the latchkey generation. A lot of Gen X were getting off the bus, going home, watching their younger brothers and sisters, letting themselves in after school, those kinds of things. And so this in turn, partly because they saw their parents working for their lives, the kind of motto that has come about with the Generation X is the work hard, but play harder. Now they value independence and self-sufficiency because of that aspect of them being at home alone. So they tend to be very, very self-sufficient in what they need to do. What's interesting, though, is because the world is becoming more globalized at this point, and they're starting to see the onset of new technologies, they're also a little bit more flexible and informal than the previous two generations as it related to workplace norms. So we got a lot of independence. And the last point I want to make here is because Gen X is sandwiched between two large generations. You've got Boomer in the past, and you've got Millennials in the future. And right in the middle, you've got this Generation X. At times, they can often feel overlooked in the workspace because so much time and attention is given to the baby boomers and the millennials. And quite frankly, there tends to be a societal divide more between the baby boomers and the millennials in the workspace. And so it's something to keep in mind about Gen X, that they can often feel overlooked due to the size of millennials, which now brings me into millennials as a generation, 1981 to 1996. Millennials right now make up the largest percentage of our workforce in the United States of America. And this generation really is the last generation to see a world before digital technology took over. But because we also lived in a world where digital technology took over and extremely radically globalized the world, more so than with Generation X, we're coming of age in a world that starts to experience a lot of division, especially post 9/11. And because of the conflictual turmoil that this generation was experiencing, and also some of their values that were rooted in more globalization and connecting with people all around the world, millennials really seek out jobs where they can have fun and where they play. The goal of a millennial is, how do I blend play and work together? I don't want to be bored. And part of that is due to the way we were educated and brought up. Something that I left off here on the slide is that we were the generation that had the baby monitors in our cribs. Like, our parents were helicopter parents. And so we were a very needy generation. We need a lot. And so the last point I'll make about millennials is that we have come to be known as Generation Me. And can be somewhat self-absorbed, because the way we were using social media and growing up in a world of social media was all about telling our story, telling about my day, telling about people what I ate today. And then we start to move into Gen Zs, which is really interesting. Gen Zs are 1997 to 2010. However, they're known as Generation We rather than Me, because their exposure to similar things that millennials went through, like global conflict and war, global economic crises, health crises like the COVID-19 pandemic, and their desire to connect with other people outside of themselves, it has spawned this mentality of a more globally connected ideology. Gen Zs care a lot about inclusion. They care a lot about diversity, but they see the world from a perspective as us rather than me against the world. For Gen Zs, life is about working with a purpose rather than a higher salary. Many Gen Zs today are not as concerned with their salaries as millennials and Gen Xers were. They're much more concerned with What does the company do? Are they a good company? Are they destroying the world? Are they destroying the planet? Are they destroying people's lives? Do I like them? No. So then I'm not going to work for them. And if it means I make less money, then I'm fine with it. So in addition to valuing diversity and interdependence, they also value truth and exploration. Gen Zs are really, really concerned right now with job security and professional development. But at the end of the day, if you are an older manager, like a millennial or a Gen X manager who has a team of Gen Zs, if they do not feel valued, if they do not feel like their values align with you and the work that you are doing, they are going to leave you. End of story. They're not going to stay. So don't expect Gen Zs to stick around if they are feeling something fishy is going on in the business and the work that you're doing. Okay, I'm going to pause here, and I want to raise a question to the group before I move on. Were there any surprises that came up about the generations that you would like to share in the chat? For me, I think one of the and so this individual in the chat says, I'm a millennial, but I feel more like a Gen Z. And I actually resonate with that. I mean, I was born right at 1992. So even though I am technically in the millennial zone, because I'm right there kind of like on that cusp, the late 90s, early 90s millennials, they kind of blend into the early Gen Zs a little bit as well. So we share some similar values, especially if we're more on the cusp with our generations. Something that I found really interesting was that Gen Zs really, really appreciate community. They're really, really rooted in trying to build not only like so much of the world has been online that right now there's this major focus in the Generation Z right now to build community like in your own spaces, like where you are. And that might be a space for collaboration with some of our traditionalists and baby boomers who really like and are seeking that more in-person human-to-human connection. So there's certainly lots of surprises that we can find when we are working through generations. But what's interesting is that this person in the chat explains to me that they're this generation, but they feel more like this generation. Now, here is the problem with us talking about generations this way. And this is kind of where I flip the course, because at the end of the day, generations are great and we can study as much as we want about the differences between generations, the similarities between generations, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're generalizing. And we know that not every single person ascribes to the specific group characteristics that are placed on them. And that can be dangerous, right? So I'm curious to know from the group, like, why is it so quick and easy for us as humans to generalize people? What is the goal of us generalizing? Something that came to mind when I was thinking about one of the positive reasons we generalize is if we have an intention to serve a group of people in a better way, we may generalize about who they are, what they are, those kinds of things in order to meet their needs better. Here in the chat, someone's saying it helps us compartmentalize, right? Like it helps us keep things in order. And we definitely want to have an ordered mind and a way to think about things. The problem is the inflexibility with generalizations. And this is where, in turn, the negative can start to happen with generalizations. So on the positive of generalization is being curious, trying to get to know a group of people more, etc. On the flip side, it can be the complete opposite, where our generalization is driven by fear and misunderstanding or anxiety about another group. And so we, in turn, use negative stereotypes or negative generalizations in order to compartmentalize and get a point across or justify treating a group of people a certain way, X, Y, and Z. So generalizing is not necessarily bad in theory, the problem is that we're human beings. We have egos, we have reactive natures, and we oftentimes, when we're coming from reactive egoic places, we use generalizations and stereotypes to help prove our own vendetta, rather than actually using it to gain a deeper insight and information about people. And when we do that, it creates inflexibility in the mind. And so, say we all have this in common. We all generalize, right? It's something that we do. But what we need to remember is that our generalizations and the stereotypes we hold shape the lens that we then view the world through and act through the world. And so the question that we need to ask ourselves is, how do we check ourselves so that generalization, if we are generalizing or we are using categories like generations to make decisions, how do we use it in a way, or what do we do so that we're not overtly using these in negative ways or not using negative stereotypes? And so now I want to switch us to what I like to call the interdependent, diverse dimensions. People are individuals at the end of the day. Yes, we might have some commonalities with our generation. Yes, we might have some commonalities with our subgroups, but at the end of the day, all people are different and the same. And so rather than us actually thinking about stereotypes and generalizations like generational thinking as a way to create company policy and practices, I'm suggesting that we really should be focused on interdependent, diverse dimensions of the individual rather than subgroups of people. So what you're seeing here on the right side of the screen is this large circle that kind of has layers to it like an onion. This is you as on paper, if you will. So this is the self, essentially. And the self is made up of 4 different layers, essentially. You've got your organizational dimensions on the farthest outreaching corners. So this is your identity as it relates to work and social interactions that you have within that organization and that workplace. So some examples, your management status, or maybe your seniority, maybe your field content and work. From there, you move inward to external dimensions. And this is really your identity as it relates to the outcomes of life experiences and decisions. So I, as an individual, can change my external dimensions, like my personal habits or my religion or my educational background. And then the further you get into the wheel, finally now at internal dimensions, things start to become a little bit more innate and concrete to the self. So your internal dimensions are based on 6 aspects of individual identity where there's limited choice or control. So for tonight's topic, age, generations, this is an internal dimension. We cannot change our age by just deciding to change our age, but over time, our age does change. And now what we need to understand is all aspects of these layers work together to create our worldview. And our worldview is partly responsible for how we think, act, and behave towards the external world. And in addition, the way we show up to people as it relates to these external dimensions might in turn persuade them to treat us in a certain way. So if someone sees that I'm older in the workspace, they may treat me different. But also if I'm older in the workspace, I may treat younger people differently. And what we need to remember is that's not rooted in anything positive. That's rooted in egoic identity in a sense, right? So all of this is about our identity as the self. It's attachment to who we are, and what we think. And it's not necessarily wrong to have those things, but when we're inflexible and we get attached to these ideas like age or generations, it creates inflexibility to create solutions in the workspace, especially as it relates to solving intergenerational conflict. I want to pause here because I've been talking and see if there are any questions. Feel free to write them in the chat if there are any questions so far. Yes, I'll be happy to share the slides out after the course for sure. Definitely. Great. So we are going to move on. So let me kind of quickly summarize really quick before we move into the next phase of our intergenerational workshop. We started out talking about the inauthenticity of the workspace and how to really break that down through using icebreakers that actually get deeper than just the surface level stuff. So even I would say like look at this wheel, like think about how can we incorporate some of this into our icebreakers. That might even be a good way to create more authenticity in the workspace. We really need more authenticity. From there, we moved into the idea of the generations and talking about how the generations are as groups. And then I kind of threw everything out the window and said, yeah, all of that's great, but at the end of the day, stereotyping and generalizing is something that we really shouldn't be doing. There can be a positive to it, but there can be a negative to it. And because of our egocentric nature as human beings, we tend to always steer more towards the negative. So we need to really be really careful about generalization. So what can start to get us out of that generalization is if we see every person as an individual, like what you're seeing here on the screen. They are a complex being with different facets of the self constantly in motion at all times of the day. Oh my gosh, well, if everyone is different and we all have these different facets, what do I do then? How do I even navigate the conversation? Avi, you've just made it so much more challenging for us. That's why we do stereotypes, right? Okay, so this is where we're going to start to talk about the 5 core concerns for relationship building. Now, 2 of my favorite negotiation psychologists, Fisher and Shapiro, they're responsible for writing the book Getting to Yes, and the 5 core concerns come out of their research in a book called Beyond Reason, which is a great negotiation book if any of you are interested in those things. But essentially, what the 5 core concerns are are things that psychologically and spiritually, I'd say, every individual holds true for themselves. The things that we want to be met when we are in relationship with others. So when we are in relationships with others, now, of course, we're talking about workplace relationships right now, but this also goes for romantic relationships, friendships, all of these things. But in the workspace, we want to make sure, especially if we are leaders in a workspace, that these 5 core concerns are being met frequently and well with your staff. So the first core concern is appreciation, right? Everyone wants to feel appreciated. People know when they're being appreciated, people know when this concern of theirs is being ignored, if their thoughts and feelings are being devalued in every single meeting that they come up. I saw this happen a lot with brand new workers in the workspace. So like someone who new hires, for example, they oftentimes in meetings, when they give input, it is not held to the same value as if someone who has been there for 5 years. Now, there's reasons for that, but the problem is, unfortunately, people treat them differently because of that, right? So we want to make sure that people are feeling appreciated. So if a new person says something that maybe doesn't really get with it, let's still make sure they feel appreciated for adding conversation. Thanks so much. I really appreciate you adding that point. I really think it fits in with what this person said, right? Like find a way to weave it into the conversation so they're able to feel appreciated. The second aspect of the 5 core concerns is affiliation. Everyone wants to feel a part of the team. And when people are feeling othered, it's hard for them to feel valuable in the workspace at the end of the day. So we always want to make sure that we're meeting a person's concern of feeling as part of the team or affiliation. The second one is autonomy. I have spoken to many people that I work with, how many times they're being micromanaged, or I do this, I want to do it this way, but my manager is asking me to do it this way. And at the end of the day, I'm getting the same result in the same amount of time, but I want to do it my way. It's like we have to let go of our need to control others and like switch to a task-oriented work mentality that if I'm a leader and I give you a task, and I just give you a deadline, I will give you pointers on how to get it done. But at the end of the day, I just need you to get it done. So just do it however works best for you. Like, I'm giving you the autonomy to figure it out, to soar. And please come if you have questions, right? It's not like saying, figure it out and leave me alone. What it is saying is, I trust you as an individual to figure this out and to figure out the best way to do it that works well for you. So we all want our autonomy. We want to be able to make decisions on how to do things. Status, right? We want to make sure that where I am is being respected in the organization, and that people are treating me in line with my status. And then finally, the role is super important. We want to make sure that my role matches your current. We know it's ignored when our current role and its activities are not personally fulfilling, right? So like, this is related to fulfillment. Many people are unfulfilled in their jobs right now. It's a problem. It's something that we really need to address in the workspace 110%. And that's a whole nother conversation too. But what you'll notice is, if a manager or a leader is not allowing the individual to do things in a role that speaks to their intrinsic value and intrinsic purpose, it's going to be a more challenging position for them. So at the end of the day, we want to make sure when we're hiring people who actually define the role that we're trying to hire for. And we want to make sure that they're going to find it fulfilling. Fulfillment is super important in anything. So our 5 core concerns that need to be met in good relationship building: appreciation, affiliation, autonomy, status, and role. Are there any questions here about the 5 core concerns and why these are better for us to make decisions on generational conflicts rather than actually thinking about generations separately? So I do want to pose this question. to the group. Why do we think that the 5 core concerns are a better way to base our communications and relationships with? Or for you personally, like, why might this be a better way for you to frame your relationships and your conversations with people? They're not fixed elements. And what you mean by that is that, like, when we generalize or stereotype, those are kind of like in our fixed mindset, versus these are more open and they're more related to every individual. Okay, perfect. Awesome. Yeah. So when we're in conflict and we're in tension with others in different generations, the core concerns, these 5 core concerns, can be used as a roadmap to really prepare and conduct a necessary conversation without letting the generalizations and the reactive emotions get in our ways. So now that we've gotten through our 5 core concerns, let's piece with process. If we have generational conflicts in our workspaces, what does the piece with process say to do? Well, the first step of the piece with process is quantum cause. It's seeing the bigger picture, being a positive cause, knowing your value and your purpose. So the first thing I would say is, when we're experiencing generational conflict, we need to bring awareness to our interdependent, diverse dimensions and the other people that we're in conflict with. Really thinking, how are my diverse dimensions shaping the way I view the other person? And how might they shape the way the other person views me? Really start to get introspective. And that really is the work of spirituality that we need happening in the workplace. The second thing is really defining what you want, right? What value, what am I valuing? What's the importance to me here? And then why do I need that in order to be more purposeful in my role? So really make sure what you want is very, very clear. So again, quantum cause is about seeing the bigger picture, getting behind the why, the what, and the context, or those interdependent, diverse dimensions. Which are here, interdependent, diverse dimensions. The second step of the Peace With process is spectrum of desire, which is balancing our desire, controlling our emotions, and defeating egoism. So when we're experiencing challenging conflict between generations, or maybe I'm getting really frustrated at my baby boomer boss, or maybe I really can't stand the new hire Gen Zs that are coming on. Well, what is it that I want? Remember, going back to that first step, what's the value? What's the purpose I'm trying to achieve? Now, is the intention rooted in negative desire or positive desire? Does what I want only serve me? Or are my actions, is what I want rooted in collaboration for the other, right? We need to always be determining where our desire is coming from. Is it coming from a place of for the self alone, or is it really coming from a place to share and give back to the team that I might still be benefiting from it, but always we want to have that sharing consciousness, that giving consciousness, getting outside of the self. And then using those 5 core concerns to really break down our emotional reactivity. So like when I get really enraged and passionate and angry about the fact that that Gen Z left work early the other day and didn't say bye to anybody, well, let me pause. Do they feel appreciated? Do they feel affiliated? Do they feel autonomous? Do they have status? Do they have role? And vice versa, really starting to explore. That's going to help calm your emotional reactivity down in those moments by starting to get outside of yourself and thinking about the other person. And then finally, the last step in our Peace With process is right kavanah. Kavanah, a Hebrew word which means direction, focus, or intention. So right kavanah in the Peace With process is about developing the right kind of mindfulness and meditation practice, making sure that we're always setting cause-driven goals, that cause being rooted in something outside of me, and then always doing acts of service. So one way, the kavanah is really the action. So like quantum cause is about the introspection. It's about the bigger picture, right? It's mental work. Spectrum of desire is emotional work. It's spiritual work. It's about checking my desire, checking my ego, internal work still. Right kavanah is where we actually get to the work in the external world, where we actually get to work in the physical world here. So I love this framework that was created by an HR professional to help guide some conversations around sticky generational pinpoints. So this is a 5-step process that you can use in the physical world to help mediate some of the challenges and conflicts that you're having along generational lines. That first part is acknowledge that there actually is a problem, acknowledge that there's differences, right? And then find ways to appreciate those differences and really focusing on the why. Like, why is it that we appreciate these things rather than what we want? Because when we start to think about the why, we're going to start to open ourselves to more possibility. Why do I want more flexibility in my life? Well, because the workspace is really ugly and aesthetics are important to me. And I don't think that you have the money to redo all of the aesthetics. So like, let me work in my beautiful home. Like, I know it's like a silly example, but that's kind of focusing on the why rather than the what. What I want is a beautiful, lovely workspace. You can't offer that to me. What you can offer to me is a flexible working schedule so that I can work in more vibrant, beautiful spaces. Flex, thinking about how can we accommodate the different approaches. Leverage, right? Really thinking about like the strengths of the individual and the strengths of the generation that you're working with to find ways to make them soar. And then of course, resolve the conflict, right? Your focus, the right kavanah, must always be on collaboration and peace. If you're not there, you're not ready to solve a conflict. If you are trying to win, you do not have the right mindset. Winning is never going to get you anywhere. You always want to be thinking about how to work better with other people, and your focus should be to find a peaceful solution, not only for yourself, but also for everyone else involved. And so to summarize this evening's class, There was one quote that I really love from Brian Formato, who is a really big HR guru, started this company called The Groove Management. And he says, self-awareness is the key to effectively managing generational differences. Managers must be in touch with their own beliefs, values, and work attitudes, and understand that these may be different from the people they manage. So again, what he does right here is he realizes it is not about generalizations. It is about self. It is about getting to know the context of each individual that we're managing and that we're working with in order to build better positive relationships. I'm going to pause here and stop sharing my screen. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Awesome. Well, then on that note, I am Avraham Calhoun. Oh, sorry. One in the chat. Yes, I do come into businesses to do work. And I was just about to go into that spiel. Thank you for reminding me. So I'm Avraham Calhoun. I am the founder of PEACEWITH, conflict resolution expert and spiritual coach for professionals. I bring peace to the workplace primarily through teaching one-on-one coaching options and also workshops in businesses. So if you liked what you saw this evening, I'd be happy to come in and do this workshop with your teams and your companies. We could also workshop it a little bit and find out specifically what it is you're trying to get at the root of. And I also do build your own workshops. So thank you for asking. So on that note, I am going to stop the recording, and peace be with you all. Thank you.